Hello, ninth grade students. No mystery reader today, and we're continuing on, beginning on page 84. Lots going on now with not only the climb, but the dynamics of the group. I'm going to start actually at the bottom of page 84, a little bit of a repeat probably from yesterday. Weisner's speech got the team moving again, but it was a reluctant crew that dragged themselves out of their tents the next morning and prepared loads to carry up the mountain. Cromwell was sullen. They hadn't seen Weisner in 2.5 weeks, and now he appeared in camp demanding that they climb. And why was he so upset that they had summoned the porters for July 23rd? Weisner had agreed to that plan weeks ago. It didn't mean the advance party had to be ready to leave then. They merely had to get most of the gear to base camp to be hauled off the mountain. As for Durrance, for the first time in weeks, he felt motivated to climb. But the summit, he was already racked by headaches and sleepless nights at 19,000 feet. How could he drag himself 9,000 feet higher? On July 11th, Durrance swallowed his doubts and set out for Camp 5 with Weisner, Cromwell, and a team of Sherpas. Before they shouldered loads for the final push up the mountain, he sat down to describe the state of the expedition in his diary. Pop Sahib Cromwell declares he is now used up and no good above 4, he wrote. George Sheldon is an invalid with frostbitten toes in base camp. Chap Cranmer still too weak to visit 1 and 2, so that Fritz, Dud, and I are the only ones left. On the morning of July 12th, Durrance tied a rope around his waist and wedged himself into House's chimney. With help from above, he found what meager footholds he could and worked his way up. When he pulled himself over the final ledge, there was Dudley Wolfe, greeting him like he had just walked in the doorway of Wolfe's home. Except for a brief visit from Weisner, Kekuli, and Tindrup, Wolfe had been alone at Camp 5 for a week. A week with nothing to break the monotony but meals. Oatmeal or cream of wheat, tea or broth, and daily trips to the top of House's chimney to search for signs of movement from below. In his diary, Durrance gave Wolfe a new nickname, the Hermit of K2. As the rest of the team made its way up from 4, laden with supplies, Wolfe welcomed Durrance into his tent at Camp 5 and handed him a cup of broth. Then he asked for a quick medical exam. When Wolfe wrestled the boots off his swollen feet, Durrance did not like what he saw. One of Wolfe's feet was blistered with the beginnings of frostbite. Remembering Charlie Houston's advice, Durrance told Wolfe he should congratulate himself on a climb well done, say goodbye to Weisner, and get himself down the mountain. At a lower altitude, his circulation would improve and his feet would thaw. If he stayed high, he could easily end up losing his toes. Wolfe wouldn't hear of it. Aside from the feet, he was feeling strong. And after what seemed like a lifetime of waiting, the rest of the expedition had caught up to him. They had 10 climbers staying on the top half of the mountain. Weisner was convinced they were going to conquer K2. And he was counting on Wolfe for the summit push. By late morning, Cromwell was headed down to base camp. Durrance, Wolfe, Lama, Kekuli, and Dawa and Tindrup, Hassan Qatar, Sering, and Finsu all shouldered loads and followed Weisner up the wind-whipped snow slope toward Camp 6. Finally, supplies were moving up the mountain. For Durrance, the climb was harrowing. He brought up the rear, spent from yesterday's work. Wolfe and 2 Sherpas climbed ahead of him on the rope. They picked their way up steps kicked into the snow by Weisner. The route wasn't hard, but it was steep. And without much exposed rock, Weisner hadn't been able to place fixed ropes. They had only each other for protection. Ahead of Durrance, Wolfe wobbled along on his frost-nipped feet. He looked strong but unstable. Durrance watched in horror as he stumbled and nearly lost his balance, then stumbled again. If Wolfe slipped, his weight would put all 4 of them into free fall. Durrance could jam his ice axe into the snow and hope for the best, but he could barely haul himself up the slope. He didn't have the strength to stop 500 pounds of weight from hurtling down the mountain to the glacier. When they finally stumbled into Camp 6, Durrance crawled into a tent with Wolf. He had climbed 4,000 feet in 2 days, and his body wasn't adjusting to the altitude change. Every part of him yearned for oxygen. He felt like a giant pile of rocks lay on his chest. Somehow, Durrance summoned the energy to light into Wolf. Wolf had no business climbing higher, Durrance insisted. He had nearly pulled them off the mountain several times today, and Wolf was even more dangerous on the descents. He couldn't get down the mountain without help from others, and at this altitude, a climber shouldn't be dependent on anyone else. Wolf listened to the lecture, but couldn't help feeling annoyed. He had been high on the mountain for weeks and ready to climb higher. It was Durrance and Cromwell who had been holding up the expedition. Wolf thought Durrance was just jealous, but he went to Wisner to make sure the expedition leader hadn't lost confidence in him. Wisner reassured him that he was doing fine. If at any point the climbing got too hard, Wolf could stay back in reserve. And this is a picture of Kukuli on the steep slopes at Camp 6. Sure, you're looking at that in your book. Can you imagine camping at that and then at above 20,000 feet? Wisner's reaction added to a suspicion Durrance had been harboring for weeks. Wisner and Wolf, Durrance thought, had an unspoken arrangement. In exchange for Wolf's money, Wisner was going to get him to the top of K2. It is unfair to take a man along and use valuable time hauling him about just because he was able to finance the undertaking, Durrance wrote, and also dangerous if conditions hit him just right when he is dependent on his own resources. The next day, however, on the way to Camp 7, it was Durrance who couldn't take care of himself. Just 100 feet into the climb, the treacherous black pyramid loomed above. Durrance felt panic rising to his chest. No matter how much air he sucked into his lungs, it wasn't enough. His head swam. He felt like he was suffocating in the open air. Finally, he sat in a heap in the snow and called ahead for Wisner. They agreed Durrance would turn around and go back to Camp 6 with Kukuli, Dawa, Tessering, and Vinsu. If he didn't feel well enough to climb the next day, he could stay there and direct the movement of supplies to the highest camps. Durrance clung to the rope on the way down. When they made it to camp, he collapsed in the tent, his lungs still heaving. His heart beat wildly. Trying to pump oxygen, starved blood into his organs, he was so frightened that he made Dawa sleep next to him to keep track of his breathing. The next day, Durrance woke the Sherpas at 5:30. He was desperate to get down the mountain and needed their help. He ordered Vinsu and Tsering to stay high and carry more supplies up to Wisner. Kukuli's frostbite had returned and he was on the verge of losing his toes. He and Dawa roped up with Durrance and dragged him down the mountain to Camp 2. Jack Durrance was done with K2. Stop there on page 92 and pick back up with chapter 8, A Perfect Day to Summit. Or is it? We'll pick up there. And thank you so much. Have a really good weekend, everyone. Take care of yourselves. Bye.